Hey there, this is Natalie, and in this video I want to give my full review of the first core of Mushoku Tensei Season 2. If you watch my channel already, you'll already know, but I was watching the new season as someone who's read the full series, so I did already know what was going to be covered in terms of plotlines and new characters. So I'll be talking about the quality of the adaptation, as well as the anime in its own right. I won't be going too deep into all of the controversies around the season in this video. This is mostly just my verdict on the episodes we got as a fan of the series, though I will be touching on my views on a couple of the biggest ones. I do think some of these are topics I'd like to go deeper into in other videos in the future though, so please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and gently caress the notification bell to be notified when future content about Mushoku Tensei and other series like Rising of the Shield Hero goes up on my channel. If you want to support my channel even further, then there's also a link to my Ko-fi in the description. Donations are really highly appreciated, especially as I'm still getting over the long corona and haven't been able to make as many videos as I planned to because of that. Plus it's just absolutely freezing where I live and I can't afford to put the heating on. I'm doing my best, but your support is really needed if you can afford it and want to help support the channel. You know, as it's me and it's nearly Christmas, the season of goodwill to all e-girls, yeah? And with that cringy YouTuber stuff out of the way, let's talk about Core 1 of Season 2 of Mushoku Tensei. Was it good? Was it bad? What were the highlights? And which parts could have been better? I'm basically going to view this core in 3 parts. We have episode 0, which is effectively a kind of OVA that covers what happened to Sylphie after the mass teleportation incident, the short arc involving Sarah, and then the Ranoa Magic University arc, which covered Rudy meeting some key new characters, discovering Nanahoshi's situation, and of course, his relationship with Fitz. Episode 0 for me did most of what it needed to, considering the limited time. The stuff covered in this episode was actually from extra chapters in the volumes of the light novel that had otherwise been included in Season 1. What happened to Sylphie was instead left as a mystery in Season 1, but of course with Fitz, Ariel and Luke being important in the Academy arc, it was necessary to show the backstory of that. And this episode 0 OVA type style allowed them to do that without including an episode like this that didn't move forward with Rudy's story later in the series, before he encounters those characters. I thought it was a good choice, though I can see that for anime onlys it may have seemed a bit random at the time, when the first 3 episodes of the core proper didn't have anything about those characters in them. But viewing the core as a whole, I think it worked. Still, because they had to get across Sylphie's experiences and her new relationship with Ariel in just 1 episode, a lot was cut, particularly in terms of how the episode ended. There was actually a lot that happened in terms of assassination attempts on Ariel, between them leaving the palace and arriving at the university. While this stuff isn't really relevant to Rudius, and the anime mainly sticks to things that are or will be, I do kind of feel like without it, we don't really know as much about Ariel, her team and their situation. We also didn't see what they got up to at the university before Rudius arrived, which again isn't so important to Rudius's story, but given we know by the end of the core that Rudius has committed to working with Ariel in her quest for the throne, knowing a bit more about her and what she's already achieved, rather than just seeing her as a friend to Sylphie, would probably be useful for future arcs. But having said all that, I'm not really someone that thinks the anime adaptation has to cover every detail and conversation from the source material 1-to-1, and I think it's okay for certain things to be left out for time or pacing reasons, as long as they don't really change the story. In this case, we can assume that all of that stuff still happened canonically, just off screen, and the option to find out that extra detail by reading the light novels or just watching cut content videos is always there for people who want every detail available. It's also possible that some stuff regarding Ariel will just be shown as flashbacks later on when they'll be more relevant to the arc being shown. While we certainly know less about her from the anime than at the same point in the light novels, that could just be because we only need to know her relationship with Sylphie for the current arc, and cramming too much stuff about a character who won't be central in this season may have messed with the pacing and felt irrelevant. All in all, the episode was enjoyable and gave us what we needed to answer the question of what happened to Sylphie after the mass teleportation incident, and who those characters who've been teased a couple of times in season 1 actually were. To me, it looked good, and having a standalone episode like that without Rudy, just a week before the proper season started, really got me even more hyped to see what was coming next, animated. Now, the next 3 episodes, and I'm going to include episode 4 here too, as it was a kind of transition between the 2 arcs, covered a 2-year period Rudy spent working as an adventurer, starting immediately after the ending of season 1. This arc was never in the original web novel, where it was just a time skip, but when rewriting the series for publication as light novels, the author decided to add a volume here that filled in what happened during that 2-year period. Most light novel readers think this was a good change, as it really goes into Rudy's mindset after Eris left, which of course sets up why he's so fixated on curing his ED, which ends up being his reason to accept the offer of a place at the academy. Still, while I think the anime did make the right choice in adapting this arc rather than skipping it, I do feel like they wanted to get the important stuff across as briefly as possible in order to get to the more important university arc. A lot was cut, especially from episode 2, which I would say was probably the worst episode of the core, both in terms of story and production. I don't think this was a particularly big deal. The episode did what it needed to do to get to the far more important and impactful stuff in episode 3, in terms of Rudy's relationship with Sarah, and therefore just how he feels during this phase of his life. The things that were missed added world building and characterization, but given it was characterization for people who don't play a major role outside of this short arc, I think it was acceptable to skip it, and again, leave it for people who want to get deeper into to read the novels. It was a build-up episode for what would happen with Sarah, and a lot of light novel readers think it should have been 2 episodes, with one for the questing and one for Rudius rescuing Sarah. But I feel like that would have brought with it its own problems, where anime-onlys were anxious to start seeing some other characters they were already invested in from season 1 again, and some progress in terms of the mysteries introduced previously around things like Orsted and Hitagami and the mass teleportation incident. I think the choice they made to only use 1 episode for this content was fine then, but there were some parts of episode 2 that weren't great, especially the scene where Rudius rescues Sarah, which was so quick that it didn't really explain how he did it. Even a few more seconds spent on this could have stopped it looking jumpy and confusing. His journey to rescue her was also made to look a lot more trivial than it was in the novels, so you never really got the sense that he was actually taking a risk. Still, I think episode 3 did make up for it, really depicting what are quite angsty, awkward scenes in a way that really put across how Rudius was feeling. It didn't include Sarah's point of view, which was included in the light novels. I think this, again, is a reasonable decision, given we're focused on Rudius's experience here, and Sarah isn't a major character long term, but her perspective on the events in the episode is quite interesting, and I do have a video reading out that part of the light novel and discussing her point of view if you're interested in that. I'll link to it on the end card. Episode 4 was a lot more upbeat, with funny scenes involving Elenalise and Soldat, as well as the fight against the Red Dragon. Some people felt this fight should have been more hype, but it isn't actually supposed to be a difficult battle for Rudius. The dragon was astray and injured, and so while word spreads of him single-handedly slaying a dragon, it's supposed to be that Rudius himself knows that it really wasn't that heroic a battle. If it had been shown as a long fight with a lot of Sakuga, it may have been more fun to watch for those craving some action after a drama-heavy episode, but that really isn't the point of this part of the plot, so I think it was just fine. Because episode 4 did take a lighter tone, it also used a more cartoony art style for some things, like Rudius's expressions when reacting to Elenalise's shenanigans. Some people didn't think this fit in the style of the series, But this sort of thing was done in season 1 for more comedic moments too, for instance with Kishirika. I found the reactions he made funny and in character, so didn't dislike this choice at all. All in all, it was a fun episode that reintroduced Elena Lise, gave us a Hitagami encounter, and set things up ready for the university arc. Now, an important change that was made going into the next arc was Mushoku Tensei using a more traditional style of OP for the first time. Previously, the opening sequences were used for world building, with scenery for current locations, or montages that showed things happening that didn't really need further elaboration or dialogue. I think this was one of the things that made Mushoku Tensei feel particularly unique, and like the studio was going the extra mile to use as much of the time each episode had for storytelling as they possibly could. However, I can also see why for this arc, where Rudius is staying in one location rather than travelling to new places, that can be expanded on in those opening scenes, and where the focus is more on him forming relationships with new people, the more traditional OP style was a perfectly good choice. It represents both Rudius's current mood and objectives, and characterises the other people important in this location, hinting at some of them before they show up too, to add a little bit of hype or curiosity around them, depending if you already know or not. I like the song and the visuals, though it will be interesting to see if the series will keep using the normal anime OP style going forward, or perhaps switch between both styles, depending on what suits the arc. There will be more arcs focused on travel and discovery in the future, so I could see them going back to the montage style again when it adds something to the episode. So, the first part of the Academy arc is relatively light-hearted. That's not to say nothing interesting or important happens, but the focus is on introducing or further characterising characters like Linnea and Pasena, Cliff, Zanoba, Julie and Badigadi, as well as setting up the relationship between Elena Lise and Cliff, and beginning the arc-long development of Rudy's feelings about Fitz. I think these episodes kept a good pace, though some people felt that the Cliff and Elena Lise and Badigadi parts should have been an episode each, rather than shown in the same one. I wouldn't have minded that, but personally I think they managed to include almost everything we needed to see to understand these parts of the story and to care about them. I also think that, as with parts of the previous arc that other people would have liked to have seen spread over multiple episodes, there is a balance between providing enough of a plotline to make it interesting, and spending so long on it that anime-only people may get frustrated with it. I really think that the balance that was struck was decent. A bit more dialogue with Badigadi regarding Orsted would have improved it in terms of keeping up the longer-running mysteries around him and Hitagami, especially leading into the Nanahoshi episode, but the encounter didn't feel rushed or under-explained, at least to me. This part of the arc was also where the biggest controversies were found though, with people losing their minds about Rudius's attitude to buying a slave to help with their sculpture making. This was a big source of outrage on the hell site known as X now back in the summer, and then people were being further upset by the obviously comedic episode where Rudius captured Linnea and Pasena. I think the issue of slavery in this story deserves its own video, but in essence, I think it's quite easy to understand the position both Rudy and Sylphie took on it. We know Rudius doesn't approve of people being trafficked and kidnapped to be sold. We know this because he rescued the Beast Tribe kids in season 1, and because of his sympathy towards Paul's cause of finding and saving victims of the mass teleportation incident who had been tricked and ended up as slaves. However, he also knows that that's not the only type of slavery that exists in this setting. People also sell themselves into a form of slavery or indentured servitude due to debt or poverty, and this is what happened to Julie's family. Now, nobody would think that that would be a nice life for anyone, but if it's something that people do as a last resort to survive, then abolishing it would mean that there would need to be other social changes in place so that there was another option for those people instead, other than just dying of starvation or being murdered by the people they owe money to. Rudius has only been in this world for 15 years, and in this country for a few months. He knows he can't possibly know enough to take a hardline view on this, or to try to change it. Sylphie has only known this world and its ways, and she's spent the last few years among royalty, where servants who've taken this path are fairly commonplace. Plus, Rudy knows that the slave they buy will be treated well. They'll be taught rare skills and magic, and will never be asked to fight or do anything dangerous or even unpleasant. He absolutely views it as an apprentice that they're looking for. This is just the easiest way to find the right person, and as a slave, Julie can live at the university with Zanaba, whereas a hired employee would have to take care of their own accommodation, food, and so on. They're looking for a child for reasons related to their potential for magical growth, so the person they get will really need to stay with them so that they can take care of her too. We even see in the next episode that Julie is happy and flourishing, and that they've not used any of the methods available to keep a slave from running away or rebelling. She is Rudius's student, and to Zanaba, she ends up as a kind of surrogate daughter. This is actually nice when you remember that Zanaba can't really make a child of his own because of his super strength. I'll also note that while Julie obviously does grow up and become an adult as the story goes on, she's never a love interest or a character that has any ecchi type scenes, just to shut up the people who, in their whining, said that she was somehow a sex slave. The most controversial thing about her is that she drinks a ton of beer at the age of 6, but that's just because she's a dwarf. I was only allowed the foam off of the top of my dad's beer when I was that age, before you say that that's probably the same as being British. As for the Beast Girl stuff, it was just supposed to be funny. Yes, he has a grab of Pacena's Devil's Melons to check if it affects his ED, but this is just a silly, ecchi part of the series, and it's Rudius. Come on, if you're genuinely offended by that, how have you even made it this far in the show? In the light novels, there is a lot more background about just how much of a menace the girls are at the school and the history between them and Fitz, which does make their comeuppance a bit more satisfying and also explains why they both kind of hate and fear Fitz. But the general gist of the way they end up becoming Rudy's subordinates is the same, and I thought it was very entertaining, just as it was in the books. I especially like the moment where Rudius realises that he could actually easily fix the Roxy figurine that started the whole thing, but decides he might as well keep going anyway. I also honestly saw some people offended by the line where he makes fun of how Linnea speaks. I'm just gonna let that sit there with you. There are people, actual people with social media accounts, that were offended because Rudy mocked a cat girl for saying "nya" to provoke her to attack him. But anyway, that's enough of that, because the tone of the arc changes quite significantly as we go into episode 9, The White Mask, and Rudius is introduced to Silent Seven Star, also known as Nanahoshi Shizuka. This episode deserves praise for a lot of things, but I think one of the most impressive moments was Rudius's panic attack on first seeing Nanahoshi in her mask. The presence of Orsted in Rudius's thoughts and fears has been downplayed since their encounter, but still ever present. And this visceral reaction to seeing the girl who he only knew as the Dragon God's companion causes him first to freeze, then to try to escape so desperately that he falls and knocks himself out. It's very clear that he sees this as his biggest fear, unexpectedly manifesting itself in a place where he'd so far felt safe. The emotion in it is beautifully animated and acted, and the relief he feels waking up with calming hands on him, though of course he doesn't yet know why Fitz's touch feels so familiar, is quickly dispelled when he realises where he is, and that Nanahoshi is still there. But then she reminds him that she saved him, and gives him a matter-of-fact reassurance that the Dragon God doesn't plan to come for him and kill him, at least not presently. The way the language switches are done here are really effective in my opinion. If you aren't new to my channel, then you'll already know I don't watch dubs. So I was wondering how they would make it clear in the anime version, where usually Japanese represents the human tongue in this setting, that Rudy and Nanahoshi switch to talking in actual Japanese and Fitz can't understand them. And then when they go back to all talking the local language, so Fitz can understand later. The way they cut to the fictional language, that of course we are to understand is what Rudius and Fitz are speaking all of the time, very briefly for their dialogue, before going to Rudy and Nanahoshi speaking Japanese again, made it clear that this was the situation without being jarring. And the work that went into developing the different languages used in the series, as well as the actors performing in them, deserves a lot of praise. I think that from an arc point of view though, what was really captivating about this episode was that it tied everything into the bigger mysteries going on in the series. So often the overarching stuff in a story can feel like it's left on the back burner while various other character shenanigans happen. And that's fine in a long story like this. But for people like me who crave big reveals and developments to theorise about, it can often feel like you just get thrown a scrap here and there and then have to wait a long time for anything more. By bringing in Nanahoshi and explaining her situation now, we have the combination of the emotional arc between Rudy and Sylphie, with Sylphie feeling jealous and left out, and the big picture mysteries involving Hitagami, the mass teleportation incident, and just what's going on in general in this world. For me, it's great timing for an episode like this. And then we have the satisfying emotional climax of the arc, which plays out over the last 3 episodes of the season. Episode 10 does start with the reunion of Rudius and Soldat, which aside from being nice to see and featuring some fun moments, like his interactions with Alina Lise, isn't all that important, setting up that this is going to be one of those more relaxing, calm before the storm type of episodes before things get intense. Rudius accepts that the way he feels for Fitz is love, and this feels completely natural, with enough focus on their chemistry and friendship over the rest of the arc for it to feel natural, even though Rudius still believes Fitz to be a boy and himself to be straight. The inner thoughts Rudius has about this are explored more in the novels, with the upshot being that he isn't averse to the idea of being bisexual, but he just doesn't think that he is. This cognitive dissonance has been there the whole time for him, and so while he could just embrace the fact he loves another man without any real issue, he knows himself at this point, and so he tries to find out more about Fitz from the vice principal, who is duty-bound to confirm that Fitz is a man. Personally, based on how it's written and the amount of clues, like the wand Fitz has, the way she talks about her master's skills, the rarity of what she can do, and her connection to the teleportation incident, I think that Rudius deep down always knew it was Sylphie, but because of his own trauma over Eris and where he was emotionally, it was easier to accept on a surface level that this was a new person, a man that he could be friends with without any pressure to perform. But when the time was right for him in terms of developing, the love he'd always had for the girl he grew up with came back. This is why he struggles so much with believing it's a man after falling in love. He's not against the idea he might have been bisexual and just not realised it yet. He just can't put it together that that's actually what's happening, and his suspicions are proven correct at the end of the episode. He now knows Fitz is a woman, but isn't yet receiving what he should have known all along, that it's Sylphiette from Buena Village. And so, in the last 2 episodes, we get Ariel and Luke conspiring with Sylphie to help her get what she wants, really characterising their friendships. And then of course, the reveal in the cave, which made me cry even though I knew it was going to happen. I think these 2 episodes really made for a great climax to the romance arc of the season, of Rudy getting over his issues, of Sylphie being brave, and of this being something wonderful and positive happening for them, after such a long period of doubt and depression. We started this season with a depressed wizard and end it with a joyful marriage proposal, but the route to get there was not simple or cliched. I know some people wanted more action, more stuff connected to characters from season 1 who we haven't seen for a long time, like Roxy, Paul and Zenith, and maybe more adventure, but that's all coming in core 2. Here we have the foundation set for Rudy to become more heroic, with his interesting group of friends and his devoted new wife. But what did you guys think? I know this has been a fairly long video and I made you wait for it a long time, but I had a lot of thoughts. I'd like to hear yours now before I get back to talking about Shield Hero again in my next video, which is obviously a bit more current. Thank you as always to my supporters on Patreon and to everyone who's helped me out with donations via Ko-fi. You've been literally lifesavers. I love you all and I hope you have the best Christmas ever. Thanks for watching this and I hope to see you again very soon.